Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, even on its best of days, genius is a complicated thing. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do because you're listening right now. I generally don't assume, but in this case, I'm going to do it because you're here. Please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, give us the old 5-star rating on pretty much whatever platform you use for your podcasts. We're over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, pretty much everywhere. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, and we're on the Instagram, or the IG as the kids call it. And where else? We're at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, guess what? We love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, pay us a visit. On this episode, we are, we traveled, we didn't travel, but we virtually traveled for a film that just had its premiere at DOC NYC, a fantastic documentary festival down there in New York City. And, it's a rock doc, but it's a good rock doc. It's a very human rock doc. It's called Lost Angel, the Genius of Judee Sill, who was a one-of-a-kind singer-songwriter from the 1970s LA, around the same time as people like Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, and others. But it charts her life from troubled adolescence to heroin addiction and, some pretty crazy stuff in between, all the way up to her tragic early death. But this is one of those stories from rock and roll that seem to come up a lot, but they're always interesting when they do, because it's one of those stories of a lost really kind of musical genius, a lost real sort of powerhouse of the time, and who had a real singular style that influenced so many other people. This film was called, like I said, called Lost Angel, the Genius of Judee Sill. It hadn't had its premiere at DOC NYC just a couple of days ago, but in advance of that, we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with the directors of the film, Mr. Andy Browne and Bryan Lindstrom, to talk about what made them want to tell this story of the Genius of Judee, and so very much more. But keep an eye out for Lost Angel, the Genius of Judee Sill, when it hits regular theatrical and video on demand platforms. I'm sure at some point in the next months, years to come, but first enjoy our talk with Andy and Bryan to talk about the film, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one. No, I mean, just officially, obviously, again, thank you for the time, and congrats on the film, man. I loved it. And I mean, I'll admit, I had heard the name of Judee Sill sort of in conversation in background when people are referencing Linda or Joni or stuff like that. So in watching this, to me, this felt like the cinematic version of like a deep cut. You're telling a deep cut story with this. Now, I mean, what was sort of the inspiration for you guys to be like, it's time for someone to tell this story?
Well, it was really just the power of that BBC performance of The Kiss that drew us to Judee. And then when we started to dig into her story, there just seemed to be so much there. You know, like, how could someone who had this kind of traumatic past and this history of armed robbery and addiction and prostitution and jail time, make these kind of spiritual hymns that just touch everyone? And that's kind of the fuel that kept us going.
And how did she overcome heroin addiction in prison, where she decides to become a singer-songwriter, and then 4 years later is on the cover of Rolling Stone? That just seemed remarkable, No,
so, I mean, you're absolutely right. When you're doing research on something like this, like, where do you start? Because, I mean, obviously, like you said, I mean, Judee had this tragic upbringing, and she was in jail. She was a heroin addict, but it was such a short shift from, you know, the gutter to basically the top. Like, where do you sort of pull resources to be able to show as much as you guys have in this film?
Well, that's why it took so long, because it took a while to get those resources. So 4 or 5 years after starting this, where we had already done a lot of the interviews based on a booklet that was in the third album, the posthumous album Dreams Come True, which had interviews with all her friends and colleagues. We knew those people were the people we needed to track down to interview. But we got Judee's archive, all her worldly possessions, her journals. It wasn't much, but all her papers and journals and charts about 4 or 5 years into the process. And that changed everything, because it gave us a way of visually telling the story. And around that same time, we got an audio tape of an interview she gave around the time that she gave that Rolling Stone interview that was in her voice, so we could tell the story in her voice. But it took a while. These films do take a long time, because if you're self-funding, you have to just, you know, shoot when you can, and then it takes a lot of time to get the materials.
For sure.
And also we cast a wide net. Like any name that appeared in her journal, we tracked down to the best of our ability, just to see if they were still alive, if they had anything, you know, they wanted to say about Judee or any memento. We contacted the LA Musicians Union Local Number 47 and got all of the kind of contracts from the recording sessions. So we literally called every musician listed there to see if, you know, any of them were still alive and remembered the session. You know, we really wanted to kind of leave no stone unturned, because we felt like we owed it to Judee.
Yeah, you get a little OCD about it, you know, and you start checking newspaper.com for any updates of stories. And I mean, so much time I spent on there just looking for corroboration of stories Judee told about her first husband who died on LSD on a raft on the Kern River. I'm like, no, she's making that up. And sure enough, I found the article about the guy. I was able to get his name finally, but it was true. Everything Judee said was true, pretty much. That was one thing we discovered. But yeah, if you're passionate about something, then the digging is kind of fun. You know, it's treasure hunting.
I mean, it really feels like Judee was born out of a time. And I mean, I'm kind of curious from both your perspectives. Why do you think, what do you think the magic stew was that made Judee sort of come onto the scene exactly right? It seems like when she would have gotten this kind of level of acceptance that she did, because it feels like 5 years earlier, 5 years later, it wouldn't have worked.
It was a period of time in music where experimentation was being encouraged, and Asylum was literally named Asylum for artists who were not necessarily on some typical pop, you know, route that they were going to take. They were given the time and the resources to create their artistic vision. So she got lucky, and she met Geffen in a way. But, you know, the luck had a lot to do with her skills, obviously. But
right.
But I also think she was kind of uniquely tuned to the zeitgeist, and had these antenna that could like literally grab these songs that were going around, you know, that only she could give voice to. I mean, for a while there, she just really seemed to have a conduit to something really deep and unique.
Absolutely.
the ether, the music ether.
No, for sure. And I mean, something else I really appreciate is just because, I mean, obviously you've got a great array of subjects on the film to talk about her, and everyone does seem to have this degree of reverence for her, but at the same time, the people who knew her will also acknowledge that maybe she wasn't the easiest to deal with at the same time. How important was it to sort of not paint sort of this idyllic picture of who she was, but just sort of as she was as a genuine person? Well,
the first kind of myth we wanted to dispel based on our first round of interviews with her intimates in LA, was that, if the Wikipedia version of Judee as kind of doomed genius artist who,
right,
was depressive and not fun to be around. And to a person, all of the people we interviewed that first week just said how much they loved her and how fun she was and what a kind of spark of life she had. And we knew that we needed to have that in the film, as well as, the more challenging stuff that's reflected in her journals and what some of the people say about her dark side, because she had it both, like we all do.
But she was an optimist in many ways too. She really was split down the middle, and until the end was writing songs, even though she was back into a junkiedom, as she called it, and she was still hoping. She would pull herself out of it. So I think there's this image of her as this dark, gloomy figure, but she really wasn't. She was really funny. Yeah. Friends just loved hanging out. She was the life of the party. She threw parties for her friends all the time. This is all the way up, to the end.
She loved giving people gifts. She was a good friend.
And it's true. Some of it, I've got to imagine a lot of it is hindsight as well, because thinking now of somebody telling off David Geffen on stage, you think the horror, oh my God, how dare they? But back then, who the hell cared, right?
It's unclear
if that even happened.
That's just it.
It's hard to say. I don't. One thing I'll mention is that in all of Judee's journals, that we read every scrap of paper she wrote on. She never had anything negative to say about Geffen in any of them. Nothing about Geffen at all. And She was pretty honest about a lot. And I'm talking from the period in which this supposedly happened to her death. So, in some ways, as it's mentioned in the film, I think it was harder for her to face the fact that this beautiful record, Heartbrew, that she made was not selling. And it was easier in some ways emotionally for her to blame Geffen for that to her friends, who she told this to, than to that in some ways the public was rejecting this. I think that was so painful. But I'm not sure she really believed that Geffen ruined her career. I don't know, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. Brian, what do you think?
Well, I think as filmmakers, we just try to present all the information and let the audience decide, because we truly don't know.
Yeah.
No, while Judee was obviously one of a kind, it really does feel like the music industry has many other stories along a similar vein of Judee's. But I'm curious from both your perspectives, what is it about Judee that made her so unique and so inspirational to so many different artists that are obviously still working today?
Her musical chops. The word genius is thrown around, but she really was just exceptional. And that she was born with it. She had perfect pitch. She scored all her own records. Nobody did that except Brian Wilson, as Linda Ronstadt points out. She, learned how to do that before her first album and then scored her entire second album. I'm talking cellos and bagpipes and French horns, written out all the parts in her hand. It was all in her head. Most people can't do that, and she could. So I think it allowed her to tap into whatever ether, into a deep way into that, and bring back all these sounds in a way that most people couldn't.
So she not only had the talent, but I think she also had the perspective based on her unique struggles, especially in childhood. And it's like Sean Colvin says in the film, Judee struggles with the good and the evil, and it's in everything she writes. And I think we all respond to that. It's like a person's brutally honest evaluation of themselves and the world, and that attracts us.
And it seems sincere. That seems completely, not put on in any way.
Well, I guess that's the really compelling part about Troubled Genius. Like, we're drawn to the lightness and the dark. And for you guys, as this story is now sort of getting into theaters and into audiences, like, what do you hope at the end of the day people pull away from this story?
However we are is okay.
I like that.
Which are the last words that Judee sings in the film.
Yeah, and that as hard as things can be sometimes, try and ride the wave and come out on the other side. I think if Judee had more resources to help her in the 70s and that are available now to people, she might have had a different outcome. So as tragic as her story is, I think there is some triumph in it too. And well, first of all, that she's getting recognized, I think she would just be so delighted by that. Right. But just in terms of why we're attracted to music like that is because we want to believe there's some deliverance, some
totally.
So I think she offers that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And as a film fan and as a music fan, just thank you for shining a light on this story and just really giving it a bit of making it feel very honest, because sometimes these music documentaries can get a little overly celebratory and a little overly worshipy, and this felt like a genuine portrait of a human being, which I really appreciated, and I think you guys did a fantastic job with
Thank you so much. That's how I hope people respond to it. I really appreciate you saying that.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for the time today, guys. And again, congrats on the film.
Thank you
Okay,
so much,
thank you,
Dave.
Dave.
Appreciate it.
All right. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. You can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.